Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to be now breaking down what is a blockbuster deal that technically has not been finalized, at least as of when we were heading into this show. But the deal largely is expected to contain the Knicks acquiring All-Star center Karl-Anthony Towns in exchange for Julius Randle, Donte DiVincenzo, and a first-round pick from the Pistons. That sounds like Bobby Marks reported that it was going to be top 13 protected. Still, a lot of minor details that have to be ironed out there. Again, nothing finalized quite yet. But sounds like this deal is on track to go through at this point. There's really no going back for either one of these franchises. So I would largely expect it to happen. And, just a week left in the offseason. Preseason is right around the corner. And we get, for the second year in a row, a blockbuster deal in those final days. Last season, it was Damian Lillard to the Bucks. This year, Karl-Anthony Towns to the Knicks. So I think that I want to start at this from sort of a general perspective of really weird timing, it feels like, for this trade to go down, considering that it is a week into the a week until the preseason begins. The Knicks feel like they're in a position where, yes, they are going to be ultra competitive for the season, and Karl-Anthony Towns being an all-star center that's on the market for them, center being their number one need, feels like a situation that they can't pass up on, but they're very restricted now in terms of what they can and can't do from here. On the Timberwolves side, to not even sort of play into next season after you just made the Western Conference Finals probably a year before anticipated, I understand the long-term implications of what it would have meant for the Timberwolves to keep Cat on the books and to have three centers making, as much money as they would be between Gobert, Naz Reid, and Karl-Anthony Towns. That's not sustainable, but to not even give it a shot this upcoming season feels weird. Now, that being said, I don't necessarily hate the roster for roster move of, I guess we'll lean into the Timberwolves here first. They get Julius Randle back along with DiVincenzo. The reality is, I think that Julius Randle is a very flawed basketball player, as is Karl-Anthony Towns in my opinion. That Randle is a downgrade. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world, though, to go out and get someone in Randle who, yes, again, flawed, has his issues. He can go get you a bucket. And that's just something Karl-Anthony Towns, ultra competitive, but last season specifically, and I know Cat did have his huge scoring outburst against the Hornets that, in that game against the Charlotte Hornets of all teams, that, yeah, you can go get you buckets, but he's not somebody that, in my opinion, is going to consistently take the ball into his hands and go make something happen, where Julius Randle, he can do that. Now, it'll probably take him a good 12 seconds to do so out of that isolation to be able to put up a shot, but the Timberwolves definitely last year, you saw it in the playoffs, were so reliant on just Anthony Edwards going and getting buckets for them, that I think it is very difficult, especially in today's NBA with the amount of talent that there is, to single-handedly run through one player. And Karl-Anthony Towns, for a lot of the playoffs, was pretty underwhelming. Not just from a scoring perspective, but obviously he doesn't bring you much on the defensive side of the ball. Some of the irrational fouls that he has are inexplicable. And I think that Randle is actually a good player, a much better player than what his public reputation would tell you. The fact that he can go get you buckets. He is a positive defender. He is one of, if not the best, rebounding non-centers in the NBA. And there are positive aspects to his game. Now, the spacing between, you look at Gobert, Randle, and Jaden McDaniels as sort of your front court, that's pretty tough. That is definitely not ideal, but I also think that there's roster flexibility in there. adding in a Donte DiVincenzo, who is a great shooter. I think they could very easily play lineups as well with DiVincenzo at the 2, Anthony Edwards at the 3, and then like if you want spacing as well, you can go Julius Randle at the 4 and then Naz Reid at the 5, because Naz Reid, that's the thing, is I feel like in this situation with the Timberwolves, they couldn't continue to have their 3 most expensive players be centers in Naz Reid, Rudy Gobert, and Karl-Anthony Towns. That now I think they can throw out a number of different lineups. And I think as well, there's a lot of depth even from there as well, where I am a very big fan of a Rob Dillingham. I like Terrence Shannon Jr. as well, the 2 rookies that they took in the first round of this year. They have a Joe Ingles sneakily off the bench for a little bit of spacing there as well. Nickeil Alexander-Walker is a pretty good shooter as well. So I don't think that it's quite as bad from a spacing perspective as people make it out to be. It's not great. It's clunky in some areas for sure, but I don't think that this is a bad deal. And the idea that the Timberwolves got fleeced is a little bit ridiculous, because what really was the market for Karl-Anthony Towns? I don't think it was much more than, an all-NBA caliber player, a really good role player, and a potential first-round pick. That overall, it's a pretty solid return, all things considered. Now, part of the issue with this is that the Timberwolves, and it's an issue with them, but it's also just reality, is they're going into a situation where they have a lot of uncertainties at the ownership position, and they're going through a sale there, and it becomes really difficult to navigate all of that when they're also very much in the luxury tax threshold, and you have, now an expiring contract in Julius Randle gives you more roster flexibility. I don't know. Ultimately, I think it's fine for the Timberwolves. I don't think they got worse. I don't think that now they're a tier lower than they were before. Now, I want to talk about the Knicks as well, because that's obviously the whole second half of this equation, is that the Knicks have continued this offseason to go out and spend and add a lot of talent, which they successfully did, where you bring in Mikal Bridges, Karl-Anthony Towns, and even if you want to go back to the trade deadline last year, you had OG Anunoby as well. And ultimately, they didn't give up a ton necessarily. Yeah, they gave up a bunch of draft picks to go get Mikal Bridges, but really it's not like they were selling off any young known quantities that are going to be really good players. In the Anunoby deal, they sent out RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley that some people are really high on. I think it was a no-brainer of a deal as long as Anunoby is able to stay healthy. And Karl-Anthony Towns now kind of slides in perfectly to that role where you get a center, which they desperately needed because Hartenstein leaves in free agency. Mitchell Robinson is still dealing with that foot injury that he suffered in the playoffs when Embiid got tangled up with him in the first round. And so he's going to be out for at least 3 months. We don't really know exactly what that means. Could be longer, could be shorter. It's a risky game to play, though, of gambling on that. So you go out and you get a known quantity in Karl-Anthony Towns where he's flawed, like I mentioned, as was Julius Randle. That Towns, like I mentioned, the stupid fouls with him, the defensive shortcomings. But I think he comes into a situation here with the Knicks where Anunoby and Bridges can make up for some of that wing / a little bit of post defense that, specifically Anunoby, probably Bridges as well, can for the most part guard 1 through 5. I think that they can contribute rebounding wise. Josh Hart, obviously one of the best rebounders in the league for like a size to rebounding ability perspective, just 6'4", but is always up there in terms of rebounds per game. That I think I like the move a lot in terms of the cohesiveness with a starting lineup. What I will say is the fit in terms of the sacrifice to the bench, and now with Tom Thibodeau, and he's back with Karl-Anthony Towns, didn't exactly have a great relationship first time around in Minnesota. That's a little bit weird to me. Again, you look at the bench now, and it's Miles McBride, who was really good down the second half of last season. Hopefully, I'm sure to at least some degree they feel like they can continue to build upon that. But then outside of that, Mitchell Robinson's a good defensive center when he's available to them. He can help out with rebounding as well for, specific situations like that. There's just not a ton of talent off of that bench, in my opinion. And I think that things could definitely get dicey there, especially for a Tom Thibodeau coach team that is going to be very reliant on that starting lineup. And it's a good thing if everybody stays healthy, of course, but you're talking running the risk with an OG Anunoby especially, who has an extensive injury history, that you could really easily find yourselves having to go out and start a Precious Achiuwa once again, or maybe a Deuce McBride. And I think that they are very razor thin. They are also very expensive for the time being, under the second luxury tax cap for this season, but they are only going to continue to get more expensive from here on out, where Karl-Anthony Towns, his contract is going to continue to get more expensive, as with OG Anunoby. Eventually, they're going to have to pay Mikal Bridges. So this is a very good roster, one of the best starting fives in basketball. I would still take the Celtics starting five over the Knicks in this situation. But that being said, I do think that there are some real roster flaws on each of these teams right now, which is why ultimately I would consider this trade a win-win, because I can see the perspectives from both sides, and I think they are both going to be very competitive in this upcoming season. But I think that there are also very clear issues with both of the deals, especially when you're talking about some of the long-term implications. And I also, my least favorite part is it does feel almost a little bit cowardly with the Timberwolves to sell as early as they did. But like I mentioned, I'm also not convinced that this definitively makes them a worse team. I think that they could be better, by some stretch of the imagination, if Julius Randle ends up giving you a productive season with the spacing that Donte DiVincenzo provides to you. I think that this is overall in that win-win category. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. And we will be back tomorrow afternoon, same time as always, at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.